San Diego State, SMU, Boise State, and UNLV versus the Pac-12. Welcome to the Voice of College Football, everyone. We appreciate your contribution. Please like the video, share the videos out on social media, subscribe, enjoy the best discussion, debate, and analysis of college football. In our previous videos and live streams, we have sized up the San Diego State situation versus the Mountain West Conference and what it all means right now and where it may land. Well, it may land with the Aztecs joining the Pac-12 still. And then there are also discussions concerning the other three schools that I mentioned, Boise State and also, of course, UNLV, but most notably SMU. The thought a few months ago was assuredly that SMU and San Diego State would be the next members of the Pac Conference. Let's check out the results, though, of these schools, their football programs versus the Pac-12. And there's been a lot of competition between some of these schools and the Pac-12 in recent history, and then a projection of how the Aztecs, the Mustangs, the Broncos, the Rebels would fare in the new Pac-12 or Pac-14. Starting with San Diego State, and of course the Aztecs, as we outlined in the previous video, have fared extremely well over the past 10 seasons in the Mountain West. 74-30 is their overall record. These are the results against the Pac-12. This past season, not so good in a 7-6 campaign, losing to Arizona and Utah in two blowouts to a certain extent, especially the game against the Utes, but they were the Pac-12 champions, of course. In 2021, San Diego State defeated those two teams. A 1-11 hapless Wildcats team, 38-14, and the eventual Pac-12 champion Utes, 33-31, a game in which Cam Rising was injured. There we also see a pretty good stretch of San Diego State against the Pac-12, winning 5 of 6 games, losing to Stanford in 9-14, 31-10 on the road in Palo Alto. However, look at those other wins. They defeated a Stanford team that went to the Pac-12 championship game in 2017, 20-17 at Qualcomm Stadium. Those two wins against decent Arizona State teams, 28-21 and 30-20. Before that, they had lost 4 consecutive games before defeating Cal in 2016. These Pac-12 teams during the mid-2010s were decent, marginal teams. Oregon State, you see, defeating San Diego State 2 consecutive seasons, the split against Cal, and a matchup against Washington. Huskies won in 21-12 in 2012. And these are all the results of San Diego State against the Pac-12 going back to 2010. It all adds up to 8 wins and 7 losses. So in those 15 games, the Aztecs were at home for 7 of the 15 games. They were outscored in all these games by 51 points. So if you go to the 15-game total, 51 points, they're outscored by between 3 and 4 points per game and stood up nicely against the Pac-12. Look at that, with the 8-7 record against Pac-12 teams that were decent. Of course, the high-level teams were the 2 games against Utah as Pac-12 champions, the games against Stanford in 2017 and 18. Those were the best teams that they faced. Then they faced a lot of marginal competition, a lot of 7- and 6-win teams, and then a really bad Arizona team that they beat up in 2021. But they fared over the course of all of this pretty well against like Pac-12 competition that won 51% of its games during the seasons in which they participated against San Diego State. Their resume for SMU against the Pac-12 is limited, to say the least. They have not faced a team from the Pac Conference since going all the way back to 2010. That was a matchup in a home-and-home series against Washington State, and that was a split between the Mustangs and some really, really awful Washington State teams that went 2-10 and 1-11. Then you see 3 consecutive losses against the likes of Arizona, an 8-3-1 1985 team, and we're going way, way back. Do these results mean anything right now? Nope, they're just fun to look back on. In 1986, an Arizona State team that went 10-1-1 under John Cooper and won the Rose Bowl over Michigan, and that 1994 UCLA team was only a 5-6 team and defeated an SMU team by a touchdown. So we add it all up, and SMU 1-4 going all the way back to 1980. So again, these results are inconsequential now SMU, of course, has thrived in the American Conference in recent years after a long, long dry spell since the death penalty of the mid-1980s. They were blasted pretty well in these 5 games by 48 points total, and most of these Pac-12 teams weren't even that good, save the first 2, Arizona and Arizona State, with an 18-4 record. But all put together, these Pac-12 teams that SMU lost 4 or 5 games won less than 45% of their games. Boise State has been the best Group of 5 program going back to the late 1990s. It's not debatable in any such way. They have the best record in college football this century. Are they the best program? Of course not. They're not a Power 5 program, but they have won the most games, and as we outlined in the previous video, actually had a stretch of 10 seasons in which they went 129 wins and 15 losses. Boise State has been remarkable during that 10-year stretch. They also finished in the top 10 6 times, and when they faced Power 5 competition, they stacked up rather well. Let's look at Boise State against the Pac-12. They had a game here in 2022 against Oregon State. They got doubled up 34-17 against a Beavers team that finished in the top 15 in the nation. Then you got to go back to the 2019 Las Vegas Bowl. They got hammered by Chris Peterson's last team, 38-7. They've got a 3-game losing streak going right now against Pac-12 competition as they lost to Washington State. Mike Leach's 9-4 team in 2017, 47-44. That was an entertaining game in Pullman. Before the 3-game losing streak, though, it was 5 consecutive wins against the Pac-12 for the Broncos. They defeated Oregon, Washington State. There's a win against Oregon State. There's a win against the 7-6 Washington team in 2015. They won those games in various locations. There's another Vegas Bowl appearance against the Ducks. They won at home. They won on the road as well. Then we take it before 2015, and of course, there's the Fiesta Bowl win against an Arizona team that lost the Pac-12 championship game against Oregon. Couple losses in 2013 against Washington and Oregon State. Those were pretty good football teams at 9-4 and 7-6. And then before that, since 2010, 3 consecutive wins for the Broncos against Washington, Arizona State, and Oregon State in highly entertaining games. And 2 more Las Vegas Bowl appearances that they won over the Huskies 28-26 and the Sun Devils 56-24 in 2011. Add it all up, and Boise State is 8-5 against the Pac-12 since 2010. That's 4 home games, that's 3 away games, and that's 6 bowl games, Fiesta Bowl, Vegas Bowl included, and the Hawaii Bowl against Oregon State in 2013. They've been outscored in these 13 games by a whopping 13 points. That's only 1 point per game. And the teams that they faced in the Pac-12, because of all those bowl games, consider 6 bowl games in 13 games and other good Pac-12 competition, and most recently a 10-3 Oregon State team this past season. Those Pac-12 teams won 58% of their games, so pretty good competition for Boise State. And the Broncos, of course, have held up pretty well at 8-5. Let's face it, as we outlined in our previous video, UNLV is a candidate for the Pac Conference because of what? Because of their location. They're in the glitz, glamour, and entertainment capital of the world, and that could be a big plus if they get their house in order in regards to everything else. Facilities, of course, the stadium is out of this world, state of the art, but they need to play more competitive football because UNLV, not just against Power 5 competition, shoot in the Mountain West, they've been a doormat. Awful. Barry Odom, what do you have, UNLV? Are you committed to winning in football? Because your resume against the Pac-12 is atrocious as expected. 2 losses in 2022 to Cal and Arizona State. They did come within 1 score of the Golden Bears. In 2018, they lost to USC by 22 points. These are going to be all losses, folks. Home and away against UCLA in 2015 and 16. They lost both games by wide margins, 3 scores, and a 34-point loss to the Bruins and Jim Mora in 2015. There's a loss against an Arizona team that wound up in the Pac-12 championship game in the Fiesta Bowl in 2014. They lost 58-13. That is not a typo. They lost back-to-back seasons to the Wildcats by the same exact score of 58-13. And then you see two other losses to bad Washington State teams, 35-27, and obliterated by the Cougars in 2011, 59-7. Add it all up, and it equals terrible. It's easy addition. 9 consecutive losses against the Pac-12 by UNLV. 3 home games, 6 away games, outscored by 260 points. That's 29 points per game, and they did not even face strong competition out of the Pac. 54-59. Marginal Pac-12 teams. They only really faced one good Arizona team in 2014, a pretty decent UCLA team in 2015. Otherwise, marginal, if not bad, Pac-12 teams, winning less than 48% of its games, but UNLV has not been able to muster one win. When we look at the performance of these schools, San Diego State, SMU, UNLV, and Boise State over the past several years, and knowing what we do know about the current state of the programs, it's easy to see that Boise State would be the most competitive right now. San Diego State right behind them with an opportunity because of their market size and possible commitment and void of USC and UCLA in the recruiting in Southern California of taking a nice step into competitive status in the Pac-12. And of course, Boise State, do not underestimate what the Broncos could bring to the Pac Conference in regards to football. We talked about the limitations academically and otherwise, market size, television households in our last video. Please check it out. With SMU, the sample size is too small and it's too in the distant past to mean anything. It was just fun to look at the scores. But SMU, a much different football program today than they were the last time they faced the Pac Conference in 2010. Thanks to Chad Morris and Sonny Dykes that has lifted that program, and Rhett Lashley doing a decent job right now in early returns at SMU, vying for an American Conference title we would expect here in 2023. SMU against the Pac would have to grow, have to get much better, certainly, to be competitive against the likes of Oregon, Utah, and Washington, but they could win their share of games in the Pac Conference. UNLV is a one-trick pony. They've got one component working for them. That's location, of course. Can the administration, can the football program get its act together? They would be a complete doormat in the Pac-12 as it currently stands. There's no question about that. That's obvious. They would get blown off the field. They wouldn't even probably win games at this point. But could they step up to the challenge? They've got the facilities. They've got the resources, we believe. And they could certainly go to their neighboring state. Arizona is playing much better high school football. It's really improved as a high school football playing state. And with UNLV moving to the Pac Conference, being a Power 5 team, they could possibly draw in that Arizona talent. Of course, Bishop Gorman is in Vegas as well. UNLV otherwise has a lot of work to do, but it could be done. You have requested a look at Tulane, Memphis, Rice, Utah State, and others against the Pac-12. We will have a good time sizing up those schools against the Pac Conference and the possibilities of membership. Leave your comments down below, right here at the Voice of College Football.